Hello and welcome back to another episode of Political Insights by TVC22. Today I'm joined by the MP for Glengarry Prescott Russell, Mr. Francis Drouin, to talk about affordable housing and the crisis that surrounds housing initiatives in the local area. So MP Francis Drouin, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Francis. I think considering the date and time that we're recording this, it would be very silly of me to not address the elephant in the capital before we dive onto housing, which is the ongoing protests at the moment. I mean, we're seeing a huge demonstration that has really gone beyond just the truckers that initially started the movement. It's been latched on by a lot of other people. And I really think that just demonstrates the frustration a lot of Canadians are feeling at the moment with this ongoing pandemic and subsequently the health measures that have come with it. How do you, looking at it at the moment, how do you think it is going? And when do you think this may even come to an end? I mean, I know it's not in Glengarry Prescott Russell. I know it's in the city of Ottawa, but it's a topic that's on everyone's lips at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, well, obviously I support the right to protest, peaceful protests. I absolutely support that. I mean, there are folks who are protesting 365 days a year on Parliament Hill, but hijacking a city and I'll say terrorizing residents with noise pollution. I do not support that at all. The point has been made. And obviously, I'm not. I wouldn't direct the police on what they will be doing. But the demands and the organizers, and I put a statement out saying I do not support this protest because the organizers have links to far extreme groups in Canada, and there's a reason why you saw Nazi flags and swastika signs on Parliament Hill, and that's because the organizers have been known to operate in those areas. And I mean, I understand that some families are sick and tired of lockdown measures and all that. And to them, I say, I understand you, but it's not the Parliament of Canada or the Government of Canada that implements those measures. That's done at the provincial level. And I think what you've seen from the Chief Medical Officer in Ontario saying that the Ontario residents will have to learn how to live with the disease. I think you're going to see that. I think that's a positive sign in terms of perhaps not implementing a severe measures of lockdown. And I, for once, do not support forever lockdown measures. We got to get on with our lives. Mm-hmm. I am not going to have to deal with the questions of when the hospital beds are full. I'm not the one who's going to have to make the decision on who lives and who dies. That's going to be up to doctors. And that, I assume there's protocols that are being developed to deal with that, but this may be a reality in the future that they'll have to make those decisions. And I understand as well that other people who are waiting for surgeries have been seen, the surgeries have been postponed. And they're getting sick and tired of that as well. So what is the plan to alleviate and deal with the postponement of those surgeries? And I often think about cancer patient. If my wife had a tumor and she was forever waiting to get a surgery, I would be pissed. And obviously provinces are going to have to come up with a plan. If they need more dollars on the table, obviously we'll be there. But I can feel it. People are sick and tired of lockdowns. I know that. And I think chief medical officers understand that as well. And they know that they can't continue with proposing these types of measures.
Yeah, and I think it's very poignant to bring this up as well. It's February, it's obviously Black History Month, and one of your colleagues in Parliament, Greg Fergus, stood up and spoke about obviously the importance of this month and the importance of acknowledging what it actually means. And on that sort of note here, you mentioned obviously some of the extreme connections that the extremist group connections there are to some of these protests. How do we go about eradicating that sort of rhetoric of hate, whilst actually not impeding people's right to be able to protest and demonstrate? Because I mean, we've seen the phrase "a few bad apples" thrown around. How does that make you feel when you hear that, and how do you sort of respond to that statement?
Well, Thomas, I have never been to a protest where somebody has raised the Confederate flag and walked around. I have never been to a protest or shared a stage with folks who have either presenting the Star of David and or swastika signs, and you have to condemn it. And the problem is organizers are wink, wink, hello with those groups, and they're not condemning it. I have been to many protests where where Parliament Hill was filled with people, and those signs were not there. I'll give you a perfect example. June 2nd, 2016, dairy farmers came up from the riding and from everywhere from Canada. Not one of these signs was seen over there. So the idea that it's just a few bad apples is a misconception. And that's what happens when you have organizers who operate in a far extreme groups. And Pat King, and I'll mention him because Patrick King has been known to publicly said that, you know, this issue will only be resolved with bullets. Well, I can't give legitimacy to a protest like that. I know that families probably didn't know that. Some people didn't know that, but it's my duty to inform them that, hey, you're giving legitimacy to these people. And we shouldn't at all give legitimacy to these people.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame, especially considering, as we mentioned earlier, the crux of the protest and the demonstration is perfectly within the rights of the workers, in this case, the truckers. And it does seem that that message is being diluted and pushed away and held in a different light, let's say. And the rhetoric, the sort of narrative around this has changed. With all of that in mind, just to sort of wrap this up, because it isn't the point of our conversation today. From what you're hearing from your own circles, Francis, do you know sort of, do we know a timeline? Do we know, is there a plan in place for when these protests might end, or is it very much indefinite?
Well, I would also, you know, I think that a rational and a reasonable approach would be to get the trucks out of the downtown core. And if people want to come and protest on Parliament Hill, they can get a permit, just like every other protesters has done in the history of Canada, and come and protest on Parliament Hill, do it peacefully, be reasonable. And I say most people are reasonable. There's always that fringe extreme group that will that sometimes are not reasonable. And unfortunately, you know, they are asking for the prime minister to resign, who was legally elected just 6 months ago. And democracies, unfortunately, don't work like that. And democracies, sometimes, yes, you're not happy with decisions that are made, but then work hard in elections. Make sure those people are not reelected if you're not happy with something, or put your name on a ballot.
Well, Francis, I think that's perfectly well said, and we're going to leave that topic there. I think it's just very time sensitive and right that we address this speaking today. The main reason we are obviously here, Sork, is about the housing situation in Canada, affordable housing in particular, what has been labelled a crisis. I mean, before we even dive into this, understand that you're a federal member of parliament, and that there is an understanding that when it comes to housing, if we were going to tier the responsibility, it would probably be provincial first, then municipal, and then federal. So that is understood going into this conversation, but that's not to say that the federal government doesn't play a very large part and can't put incentives in. So just wanted to prelude it with that, obviously, before we dive into it. One of the particular initiatives that we might as well start with is a great one that's in its second phase right now, started a few years ago, the Rapid Housing initiative. As I said, it's currently in stage 2 right now. Could you give the viewers a little bit of context and outline what this program is and how it's going to benefit Canadian citizens?
Yeah, the Rapid Housing Initiative is just we work. What essentially what it means is we've realized that there is an urgent need for affordable housing. We know that even with the Rapid Housing Initiative is not going to solve every housing problem in Canada. And I want to manage expectation with folks. And there's so many dollars available from the federal government. But what it does is that it guarantees, well, the word is in the phrase rapid. It ensures that we work with, you have to work with partners, you have to work with municipalities, you have to work with developers, But what it ensures is that it forces all of those partners to work fast, get your permits up and running, and build as quickly as possible. And I think, putting aside the Rapid Housing Initiative, there are people who are working, working actively to find new ways to get homes faster up and running. I mean, homes available. I mean, it takes, depending on the labor and the properties, it can take up to 6 to 8 months to a year to build a home. But now there's people who are saying, well, the traditional way that we're building homes, is that the right way? And is there other solutions that we can bring from conception to market? Is there ways that we can do that faster? And I think you've seen that concept. Tiny homes is actually a really good concept. Is that something that we could support back home? Potentially. I'm always open for ideas.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned back home there, which is obviously the crux. We're bringing it back to us. We know that almost 3,000 units, whether they're being newly built or renovated through the Rapid Housing Initiative, just happening in Ontario themselves. Is there any movement through that initiative happening in Prescott Russell at the moment?
Well, there's 2 projects that I'm actively working on with regards to the Rapid Housing Initiative, and that deals with seniors, specifically for seniors. For me to be working on other projects, I need partners. I don't own. The federal government does not own land in Glengarry, Prescott, Russell, other than, some would argue, the Via Rail line that passes. But you can't build homes on a 6-foot by 1,000 or 100-kilometer railway. It's not going to happen. So there are good projects that I'm supporting as well. It's not through the Rapid Housing Initiative, but it's for women's shelters. And that's something that just as I'm speaking to you, the application was submitted just a few weeks ago. And I hope that project will be successful, because I know during the pandemic, it's highlighted many women were partners who are stuck in situation of violence, can't move out. And that has me concerned with regards to, the mental health, but the well-being of our citizens.
And understandably, the urban areas of Canada do have the highest levels of population and population density, and they have one of the higher needs for new housing. As we can see with the Rapid Housing Initiative at the moment, there's a lot of focus on those areas. So what are some of the other ways municipalities in more rural areas, such as what we live in Prescott Russell, and as far further wide in Glengarry for your riding, what other programs are accessible to municipalities, and what can they look to do to apply?
Well, there's a $30 billion program that we launched in 2018. So that program is still up and running for affordable housing in general. So anybody can apply, and it's the CMHC that runs that program. The issue, and I hope that we have provincial elections coming up and municipal elections coming up. How are municipalities reacting to development in their own hometown? Are they requiring that if a developer says, I want to build 600 homes or 100 homes, I want 20% of that to be dedicated towards affordable housing? And speaking with my colleagues, some municipalities are doing that. And without pointing fingers, are we doing that here in Prescott Russell? And the idea that affordable housing is only for people that don't want to work is an idea that's older than me, and it's a false narrative. When we're looking for labor, and it's all tied, we have a labor issue, but if we want people to come work in our area, we need to provide affordable housing. And I challenge anyone who is making minimum wage to buy a home, and you can't do that right now because it's expensive, and that's mainly because the supply is not there. Even though Rockland is booming, even though Russell, Embrun is booming, they're building tons of homes, but it's still not enough for the population that we have. And I guess in some ways it's a good problem to have. We have a lot of people that want to move to our region, but also we can't forget those who simply can't afford a home, at $400,000, $500,000, $600,000.
Yeah, and we're seeing that obviously, especially during the pandemic, we saw this migration from urban to rural. And I mean, we talk about Clarence Rockland there in particular. I mean, we saw a house the other day in Morris Village go for upwards of $1 million. So when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just about it's not just about making houses, but like it's talking about how expensive houses actually are. People can't afford to put deposits and down payments down on a home because of the astronomical prices. So when we talk about the issue with affordable housing here, and Peter, how do we tackle the ever increasing cost of housing as well as obviously creating more homes?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that all of us need to have a conversation. I mean, I come from Hawkesbury. I grew up on a property not that big in a suburb in Hawkesbury. But do families want to live in a box in a condo? And that's a conversation that people need to have. And if they don't want to do that, then how do we build homes where we don't we don't create an urban sprawling problem,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, is there a way that we can rethink those models? And with telework now, the idea of having people going downtown, working there, and then coming back to sleep in our communities, I think that's a model that's probably non-existent. It'll change the way we work. It'll definitely change. And the way we build our communities will change as well. And I again, elections are coming up for the province and for municipalities. And I would ask citizens to ask those questions to their municipal politicians. And is the town creating those plans for land? Do we own land? Do we have land to build housing on?
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier something about incentives as well, and I think that's a really interesting idea. So as I mentioned at the start of the conversation, that sort of breakdown in terms of responsibility, where housing really lies. Even though the federal government isn't out there to create houses and be a state homeowner essentially who rents out to people, there is this potential idea of like a carrot and a stick approach. We see it in more urban areas, specifically if a city, of a town focuses construction of affordable housing around public transport, for example, a public transport area, then maybe that public transport renovation project gets bumped further up the list. It gets done a little bit quicker. Are there any of these sort of carrot and stick initiatives that could potentially sort of drive increased affordable housing and new housing in the Prescott-Russell region that you could see?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Ontario government has already started. I think they're called ministerial zoning permits, or MZOs, I think, and that essentially just forgoes all of the permits and the zoning that they have to go through, and the NIMBYism that exists in certain communities when there's projects that come forward, and understanding that. We don't have a say in that, but if you come to the to CMHC and said, "Hey, listen, I've got, we're ready to build right now, and the Ontario government is supporting us, or your provincial government in general is supporting us through MZOs or whatnot," then CMHC is going to look at that favorably, because that chance of it being built is much greater than the other one who haven't done any other homework. And that, I would say, as folks are applying for projects, that's something that they need to keep in mind. If an entity is giving you money or dollars or financing it, how quick can you get it up and running?
Yeah, we talk about affordable housing, the cost of housing here, as we mentioned, and that's essentially the goal. We're trying to make it, as is mentioned, more affordable for everyone. To flip it the other way and obviously play devil's advocate here, the majority of Canadian families, I believe the stat that I found was about 2/3 of families in Canada are homeowners already. So driving down home prices is reducing the value of one of the largest investments most families will ever make in their own lifetimes. So how do you strike a balance between creating an affordable housing market to ensure that whether they're new immigrants, new Canadians, or people lower down on the ladder in terms of a financial position can get onto that housing ladder without reducing the value of a great investment made by a lot of Canadians?
Right. And then, and Thomas, you hit the nail on the head with that one. Obviously, if policymakers would just welcome a supply of homes left to right, but that's not going to happen because the labor is simply not there. But if provincial governments and municipalities would say, all right, we're opening up the doors, developers, you can build as many homes as you want. Obviously, that would drive the value of the home down because the supply is greater than the demand, and just simple economics. But there are tools in place where we can create that right balance. And for instance, we know that there are foreign investors who are buying homes and don't live in them, and they're investment properties. We're increasing taxes on them to discourage that particular practice. I'll say it here, we're not planning to increase capital gains taxes for homeowners. And it's something that we keep getting accused left and right. Every budget cycle, there's a party out there that says, oh, Francis Drouin wants to increase your capital gains taxes on your principal resident. That is not going to happen. But you're right. 2/3 of Canadians own homes. And we just got to manage the increase of 20% per year. That's not sustainable. It's just simply not sustainable for new homeowners. I mean, you can have a great value in your home, but if nobody can buy it, I mean, it's just not going to happen.
One of the elements we haven't touched on here, obviously, when we talk about affordable housing, it's not just about home ownership. The rental side of it is a big issue as well. People are very much struggling to afford rent, and it's about people not being able to. We mentioned that house in Morris Village going for almost $1 million in Clarence Rockland, and it's people born and raised in an area who are being priced out of their area, and rent often can be a way to potentially stay in somewhere smaller. It's not that big of an investment, but we are seeing incredibly high prices for rent in Ontario as well. So what are some of the solutions, both federally and you can see as like more trickled down from a different position on that pyramid we mentioned earlier, that can help reduce the cost of rent locally? Should we be looking at a cap on rent prices? Because subsidies really only end up more money in the owner's pocket, because it then gives them an opportunity to pump up prices over time because you've got more money in your pocket.
Yeah, so we don't deal with rent control at the federal level. This is strictly a provincial jurisdiction, but some provinces have, what they've done is say, well, if homeowner or the owner of the property, we recognize that you have increased in costs, so you may increase the cost of the rent by the rate of the inflation, and that is a type of rent control. Mm-hmm. Do I support that? Do I not support that? I mean, in extreme times, yeah, I would support that. And I remember being part of I was just a staff, but I remember 10, 15 years ago there was a rent control put in place to manage that increase in rent, and not having major increases in rent for people. And you have to recognize that there are people that are on pensions who don't have the luxury of their pensions only increases with the rate of inflation. It doesn't increase further than that. So as soon as somebody surpasses that rate of inflation, then they're out. It's dollars that are coming out of their pocket, and they have to sacrifice that somewhere else in their budget. So from our perspective, from the federal government's perspective, is there are grants available for rent supply. So if a developer or somebody wants to build more property or apartments for rent, then they may be subject to a greater grant portion as opposed to a loan portion, just to provide that offer. Because now we've seen a lot of homes, for instance, being built or condos going up, but condos are a different governance structure. They're not apartment buildings, and that's different. And it's different because now you're dealing with one homeowner or one condo owner versus a person who owns the entire building.
One of the other things obviously affecting the cost of homes is the interest rates at the moment. We know they were all-time lows essentially over the past couple of years, which meant that although it made it seem like it was easier to get a home, it really only ended up benefiting, it would seem, people who already had that financial security to be able to invest, maybe go get a second home. Because as we mentioned beforehand, a lot of these people looking to try and get on a property ladder cannot afford the price of a deposit anyway. So is this interest rate, these low interest rates, something we really need to be looking at here as a negative, as a negative factor affecting people's abilities to not only get on the ladder, but also what's surging up the prices and values of homes because people are massively overbidding?
Yeah, and I would say in our region, we for the first time we went through a bit of a crisis like this, because we had folks who moved from here that didn't come from the region, and they were ready. They were used to bidding wars that we hadn't seen in the region. I've spoken to a lot of real estate agents. They've said the prices have remained high, but it's stabilized in some ways, as opposed to, you know, seeing that 20 or 30% increase that we were seeing during the pandemic. Now it's sort of stabilized, but it's still high. It's still high, but it's just not increasing as exponentially as we were seeing. The other factor I would say, one way that we're sort of helping first-time home buyers is we do have first-time home buyers program. If you don't have enough dollars for a loan or for a down payment, there are ways that through CMHC that you can get access to first-time home buyer programs. And it's something that I know families in the region have used, and they were able to buy homes for access that first-time home buyer. And with regards to interest rates, the Bank of Canada, I mean, politicians don't dictate the way whether or not interest rates will go up or down, but we do give a mandate to the Bank of Canada, and that mandate is making sure that we keep a 2% inflation. I'm sure, and I'm not an economist, but I'm sure economists are thinking, if we increase interest rates today, what is the overall impact on the economy, and is this going to help reduce the rate of inflation? And if it's not, then that's probably why the governor of the Bank of Canada just last week decided not to raise interest rates right away. But he did signal that, I mean, they've gone down for they're as low as they can be right now. So he's signaling like they have nowhere to go but up. So prepare for interest rates to go up. I'm not expecting that Canadians, or older Canadians, much older Canadians than you and I, Thomas, would remember the 1980s, and my father being one of them, saying that you know, we had to borrow, our mortgage was 15-20% almost at the time. Well, I don't think we're going to get there at all.
Well, again, that's the thing. How far is this going to go, I think, is the question on the mind of a lot of Canadians at the moment.
Right, and that's what we're seeing in the inflation is a lot of it has to do with supply issues. Of course, we can control a portion of the inflation with interest rate, but is that going to control the entire inflation back down to 2%? And that's the $1 million question that economists are debating right now, is if we do start increasing interest rates and it does nothing to control inflation, then we're actually hurting the economy more than we are supposed to help it.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point, because we look at our region in particular, and you mentioned there about urban sprawl or densification. And normally when you think affordable housing, you think densification, but that tends to be something that people escape to the rural side of living to avoid in general. So how, especially as a resident as well as an MP for Glengarry, Prescott, Russell, which is a more rural area, how do you strike that balance between finding and creating things that are more affordable for people whilst retaining that essentially urban charm, a rural charm, pardon me?
Yeah, well, I don't deal with those questions, but I do hear it. People in Russell, for instance, my new hometown community of 4 years, they talk to me about it, right? Some of them are not happy that there's new developments happening. And I'm sure in Rockland, it's the same thing. I mean, Rockland is a booming community. And I'm sure there are those pressures that some community members, well, you know, I remember X years ago when it used to be when that community spirit was there. The town was much smaller, but I was able to go to X, Y, Z, and life was better back then. And I always say, everybody sort of says that sometimes, but it's a balance that policymakers have to think about. And I'm not, growth is not I'm not anti-growth. I support it. But there are ways that I think that policymakers have to communicate that to their population. And if there's an advance warning to say, on this property, get ready, it's not going to be built now, but if you're buying a home close to that, there may be development in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Understand that, right? And I think that predictability would provide a lot of comfort to residents, and also get rid of that NIMBYism that can exist in some communities.
Yeah, NIMBYism, a great phrase to describe a lot of how people are feeling at the moment. And considering that note, how I want to really end this, MP Drouin, is to really look at the positives. Why is it so important to invest in affordable housing? Why is it important for people to not spend upwards of 30, 40, 50, 60% of their paycheck just on a mortgage or rent? Why is it beneficial for communities and the economy to have affordable places for Canadians to live?
Well, I mean, access to labor is an issue in our community. If we want people to work in our small businesses, some low skill labor sometimes they don't have the luxury of working at 50 or 30 or $25 an hour. They're getting jobs at minimum wage, but they're still essential to the economy. They're still needed. And if we don't provide homes to them, then we're always going to have a shortage of worker. And eventually we're going to be, we're spinning in circle. We can't find people to work. And then you get restaurants that are having to close down or shortening their hours because they can't find labor. And part of that is because you need a home if we want to attract a certain type of population. And again, when I say a certain type, I don't care the amount of money you make. It's not important. But I just realized that if you want access to that particular labor, we need to, as a society, we need to provide them a home.
Yeah, and I think there's a really interesting, absolutely, and I think there's a really interesting side from, as you're taking there, the labor side of it, but also the consumer side of it. I mean, if I had a little bit more money in my pocket, it doesn't go into the piggy bank, it'll probably go into the pub down the road, which then is stimulating the local economy in the local area, right?
Well, yeah, Thomas, I'm looking forward to, those soccer get-togethers at Gab's or Boston Pizza or whatnot.
Absolutely. We're going to be celebrating Canada's trip to Qatar later this year, because I'm going to put it out there. They're 1 point away. They're going to make it.
Yeah, perhaps we should switch roles one day. I should have you come and talk about Canadian soccer.
Absolutely. I'd have to go dust off the old suit, though. Well, MP Drouin, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today. I actually have a couple of minutes left, and considering this interview was in English, I did receive a couple of questions in French. You've gone over 99% of what is asked, but it's just an opportunity to maybe end in the other language, if that's okay with you.
Absolument.
Fantastique. Donc, Mélanie Marcil nous contacte et nous dit « Nous connaissons une pénurie de logements à prix modique depuis longtemps. Le prix des loyers ne cesse d'augmenter. Pourquoi ne pas arrêter les bidding wars sur les prix de maisons en ce moment? Bientôt, nous allons voir de plus en plus de gens sur la rue et plus de logements à prix convenable. »
Ouais, ça, c'est quelque chose qu'on a fait allusion dans notre plateforme, ce qu'on appelle il y a des closed bidding wars, mais tu ne les vois pas. Donc, on demande aux consommateurs de soumettre dans une enveloppe un prix, et c'est quelque chose qu'on doit discuter, s'engager aussi avec les personnes qui vendent leur maison. Je pense que c'est une conversation qu'on doit avoir, mais je dirais que ce n'est pas la problématique unique qui existe. Et ça, on dit toujours, il faut faire attention de ne pas simplifier la problématique, parce qu'elle est je regarde toujours le monde avec une partie de la tarte. Est-ce que c'est une partie de la tarte? Oui, mais il y a d'autres enjeux aussi, dont l'offre des maisons, même si on voit dans nos projets, dans nos alentours, qu'il y a plusieurs maisons qui sont bâties, c'est encore pas assez. Et ça, même si on voudrait Ben là, je suis à Rockland, TVC 22. Je sais que vous partagez ça partout, mais Pas de vin Construction en bâtit plusieurs maisons. Mais même à ça, Pas de vin me parle souvent du manque de main-d'œuvre qui ont eux autres aussi. Donc, même s'ils voulaient bâtir 1000 maisons ou 4000 maisons par année, ils n'ont tout simplement pas la main-d'œuvre pour le faire. Et ça, je pense qu'on est rendu à un endroit où est-ce qu'il faut repenser comment on bâtit des maisons. Et de plus en plus, il y a des entreprises qui spécialisent dans la manufacture des maisons, et on parle souvent des les petites maisons aussi. C'est peut-être une solution à court terme pour s'assurer que les gens ont accès à du logement abordable.
Et Francis, la deuxième question, c'est quelque chose que vous avez répondu en anglais, mais Lisanne Marlot demande, en plus des prix des maisons qui sont à la hausse, pourquoi étouffer le peuple avec une grosse hausse de taxes?
Oui, bien ça, je veux dire, les municipalités, là, je ne sais pas de quelle sorte de genre de taxes qu'on parle, mais les impôts fonciers, les municipalités, eux aussi, ont des coûts à dégager. On peut toujours s'obstiner à savoir est-ce que l'argent est bien dépensé ou non. Ça, c'est un débat interne qu'on a dans notre société, mais c'est certain que par exemple, je vais parler de l'éléphant dans la chambre, la carbon tax qu'on a. Chaque citoyen reçoit un retour d'impôt lorsqu'ils font leurs impôts à la fin de l'année, avant le 30 avril. Les consommateurs reçoivent cette taxe-là. Par contre, je pense, ça c'est une fois par année qu'ils la reçoivent. Mais je pense au cash flow des gens qui n'ont peut-être pas les moyens d'attendre ce retour d'impôt-là à la fin de l'année. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a une façon que nous, on pourrait remettre ce retour d'impôt-là semestriellement? Et ça, c'est quelque chose que moi, en ce moment, je pense, surtout pour aider les familles les plus nanties.
Wonderful. Well, Francis, that sort of top and tails the couple of questions in French there. So I do appreciate your time. Thank you very much for answering our questions, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.